It's said that the Dharma can be described as a bird. I like to think of it as an eagle, or a hawk. I love hawks. And that the one wing of the hawk is the wing of compassion and love, and the other is of wisdom and insight. And we have been practicing and offering that one wing of caring, of repairing, of seeing what's beautiful about us, of strengthening, of creating safety for ourselves. And how important that is in both strengthening and in creating the conditions for not only well-being, but for then beginning to go deeper into that truth-seeking of who am I? And sometimes when we're when we feel a little lost, and when we don't know, what am I doing? Who am I? Why am I alive even? Then that love and that caring and that repair helps us to come home. Not so much answering that question as, oh, just to care is enough. You know, just to care, just to say, here is my courage and here is my effort. That's the journey. That's enough of the answer in a way, in a way. And then in that more ease and connection, another journey can begin. And we've already started that journey. Each of us, in our own way, being born into the bodies that we have been, have inquired into, well, who am I? Are the lessons that I received about wearing dresses, or what girls do and what they don't do, or what boys do and what they don't do, are those true for me? And most of us, at some point in that inquiry, have decided, well, this isn't true, this part isn't true, and this part is. Like, I'm a girl and I love other girls, right? And so we all have been on such a deep truth-seeking journey, and that beautiful strength of challenging the conditioning that was ascribed to us and saying, no, this isn't me. This isn't myself. I want to find what my true expression is. And Sam, it's so funny that you gave that beautiful blessing, because that is exactly right. We have, all of us, young or old, been on a journey of inquiring, who am I? What's my true expression? And the capacity to do that has rested on the willingness to let go of identifying with those messages that we were given about what we were supposed to be like. And that's the beginning of the journey, this deep spiritual journey that actually can encompass more than our gender expression. Because today we were talking about, in our Q&A, about the earth and how do we connect with the earth, how can we honor the earth, how do we give thanks to the earth, how do we live in relationship to it. And what is it about the earth and nature and rivers and ocean and trees that is so healing? We could say it's because there's no selfing in their expression. There's no sense of, hey, you're on my territory now. You're standing in my space. If you imagine a tree saying that, get out of my space. Or a river saying, you're interrupting my flow. Get out of the river. Like there's no sense of the river owning themselves and saying, this is me and mine, get out of my way. Or the tree saying, hey, hey, you're sitting in my space in the shade. This is my space. This is like me. Get out of my space. So that one of the singular differences between nature and ourselves, we could say, in terms of the free-flowing expression of beauty, is the places where we fall into ownership and the relationship of ownership. And if we name the cultural expression of ownership, it is clear how much suffering is involved in that. So, when not that long ago, men in Europe owned women, and wives and children were the property of men, men could do whatever they liked in that relationship. And it wasn't that long ago that it was outlawed for men to rape their wives, because wives were considered the property of men, and in some way still are. And it's a little true, maybe, to say that in our lover relationships, sometimes we feel not owning exactly, but a little bit, like, hey, you're my wife or husband or partner or honey, and I expect you to behave in a certain way. So we see the way ownership of land has meant that the people who have owned land have clear-cutted it, or the people who own parts of rivers feel fine. And even if they don't directly own the river, but because there's that sense of, I can do whatever I want because I'm a human being, dump toxic material in the rivers, even when we know it makes people sick, like the Love Canal. Clear-cutting forests and destroying the land that way and the habitat of animals. Dumping nuclear waste in concrete pails that disintegrate over time so that it's leaking into the oceans. And I could spend the rest of my Dharma talk in a litany around it. But I'm naming it for one reason, and that is to clarify what ownership does in the relationship to what is owned. And that ownership obscures the dignity of life. We can't see the dignity of that life that we're owning when we're owning it. And it happens, isn't it true, that we think our bodies are our property and that we own our bodies. And we push our bodies or do what we want with our bodies because we feel we're entitled to, because our bodies are ours. And in retrospect, I realize now that when I went on lovely backpacking trips, because I wanted to be like Butchie, like I'm strong, I can do it, I'm a butch, I would carry these really heavy backpacks on my backpacking trip, and now my spine is a bit of a wreck. Because I felt like my body was mine and it should produce and do what I felt, what I wanted, basically. And I don't need to go into a litany of the other ways that I have not respected it. One way is not eating. Like, oh, I'm too busy. Oh, that's too much of a drag to have to make a meal. Or the opposite. There were times when I couldn't stop eating. And I understand why. So I am not into judging myself around it. But I am saying that some of how it was possible to live out those expressions was because I didn't regard my body as a sacred life, independent of my wishes. Like nature, which I certainly respect as independent of my own wishes. The caring of the land and the trees and the waters, but not my body in the same way. And isn't that true also of our feelings? Like this feeling is arriving inside of myself, so then it's mine. And we say that in our language. I am angry. I am sad. I am happy. Rather than seeing those emotions as other entities of life expressing themselves that have their own dignity and that deserve the same caring as nature and our bodies. And the same with thoughts. These are thoughts arising in the expression of life. And actually, they have their own life and deserve the same respect as does a flower or a mountain. In fact, everything about ourselves as nature, because we are nature, we're part of the natural world, is an independent expression of life. And when we talk about liberation and freedom, when we talk about the fullest journey of ourselves into our queer, trans, bi, gay, lesbian, gender non-conforming selves, that's the beginning of our journey. Our journey goes deeper to begin to include all aspects of ourselves as sacred, as inviting what is a true expression rather than a conditioned expression of this culture or of this society that rests in ownership. Because we're inculcated over and over again into what you own makes you. And is that, it's like if you own a Lamborghini, then it means you're a special person, right? Or if you own this real super house, then it makes you a special person, and people, like you become elevated, right? Or if you own a lot of money, oh, Warren Buffett, or oh, Jeff Bezos does this, or the Apple guy does that. Oh, they're special because they own. And it has nothing to do with the incredible beauty that nature expresses itself and calls us to be expressed in the same way, that brings such profound communion and freedom. So whether it's our bodies we're owning, our houses we're owning, cars we're owning, whatever it is, that whole set of relationships that we as activists challenge, that challenge can go so deep. That that Mel talked about renouncing. What do I need as against what do I own? But that renouncing is renouncing the ownership relationship everywhere it comes up. And when it's renounced, we are free. Our life's expression of who we are, our unique, beautiful, individual selves, get to be expressed without any obstacle. Just in the way that when we go to a river or go into this desert or the bay or wherever we are, or our gardens, and we see this beauty of a flower or of a plant expressing itself freely. That is our possibility as well. And these teachings start with repair and love and go all the way into our expression as totally beautiful and free. And the inquiry into it is the inquiry of ownership or attachment. And that attachment begins with the dynamic of wanting and not wanting. That ownership is rests on that dynamic. Whenever we identify with something as me or mine, we're going down the wrong path to freedom and our expression as in our community. So we have been taught, and we are wired to do it too, but the wiring can be healed. We have been taught, because this culture in particular, in some cultures it's a little better, but in this culture, in the European culture, but in America and England particularly, ownership is venerated in ways that have distorted love and freedom. And so as a queer, gender non-conforming, lesbian, bisexual and gay community who is already loving ourselves in our expression that hasn't adopted the traditional ownership, we are invited to continue that exploration into the unconscious, this is me and mine, really every moment. When we're not mindful, it's there expressing itself. Every moment when we are not caring or mindful, that dynamic is happening. That's actually what the Buddha says in the Abhidharma. So we're playing out this cultural sickness because we see how sick it is to dump mercury in the river and not to care. So we're not doing that, but we are owning our feelings. And in that ownership, disrespecting the integrity of their life, or our bodies, or our thoughts. And so, and our perceptions, all aspects of ourselves. So what does it mean then to begin to go deeper into this movement of freedom? It really does mean beginning to question, is this me or mine? And there's one great teaching that helps us to challenge that ownership, and that is the acknowledgement of impermanence and change. Like if we were not so much to notice the content of our experience, but to notice that it's coming and going all the time, it becomes clearer that we can't own any of these aspects of our life, right? Because it keeps on changing. And that doesn't necessarily happen, but in the context of being in the Dharma and getting older or getting sick, it becomes clear, oh my God, if I had ownership of my body, I would stop the aging process, because it kind of sucks. I mean, not in the growth of my wisdom. I love that part. But I have arthritis in my joints now. And I've lost the strength in my fingers. It's clear to me that I have no control over my body's aging process, or very little. And I know we all know this, but I mean really taking it seriously. By that I mean keeping it at the front of our minds. Like consciously, this body is aging, and it is not in my direct control how it ages. This body gets sick, and it's not in my direct control. How it gets sick, how long it gets sick. I mean, I can moderate it, but it's not in my direct control. I had polio when I was 6. That wasn't in my direct control. There was an epidemic in South Africa. What would it be like to, as we relate to our bodies, to offer the mantra, this is not me or mine. This body is part of nature, sacred in its expression. How can I support it without owning it? So if we're moved to to offer that, then it's this acknowledgement of the change that's happening all the time in the body. And one of the easiest places to notice that change is in the fact that every breath arises and passes. Every breath. And we know we try and control and own it when it's pleasant, right? I want that next breath. I want that pleasant breath, right? But luckily for us, if we keep staying with the arising and passing, it becomes clear that this fundamental part of our body is changing continually in the in-breath and out-breath. And for those of us who feel moved to inquire into it, when we meditate on the breath, it isn't just noticing the content of it, that the guideline in perceiving the breath, the Buddha gives us this guideline in the Satipatthana Sutta, is to notice its impermanent nature. To notice that it's coming and going. And that's true also of our sensations in the body, which are always coming and going. There's tingling, there's hot, and then I'm cold, and then I'm hot and warm and tingling and vibration. Stretching, pulling, pulsating. So in the ways that I might look at a river fascinated by its flow, which I did this summer at the Yuba River, just delighted in the stream and the bubbles and when it meanders and when it's rushing. That relationship, or when we listen to music, that it's really beautiful, that flow of notes and sounds, not as me and mine, but as music. That relationship, that same quality of relationship directed towards the life of our bodies in sensations and breath. And then a little, as importantly, I'll say it this way, as importantly, the way that we perceive the world, our perceptions. I've shared this story before. It kind of seared itself into my memory because I was a young kid. When I was 8 or 9, at about 3 a.m. in the morning, there was this like big knocking on the door. This is when I was living in Johannesburg. And it was these 2 big policemen, and they said, "Where's Mrs. Berman?" And so I went to get my mom, and she came out, of course, in her night dress, and they said, "Mrs. Berman, you're under arrest." And there had been an emergency act in South Africa passed so that people could be arrested without any warrants or judicial proceedings. So my mother said, "I'd like to go and get changed." And They followed her into her bedroom. I was there too because I was like really scared. And she said, would you leave the bedroom? Now, there was only one door in the bedroom. The windows had the wire lattice on, so you couldn't get in and out through the window. And they said, no, we're not leaving the room. That perception of my mother as less than human because she was an activist and was associated with African freedom and anti-apartheid movement meant that she was regarded as less than human. That perception of those policemen was a perception they had unconsciously owned because they were taught that. How many of our perceptions are unconsciously owned and acted out because we were taught to own them? That disregard dignity and respect. Perceptions about ourselves and perceptions about others. Their perception and their thinking. Our perceptions directly give rise to our thoughts. How many of our thoughts do we take as our thoughts rather than thoughts with their own life, which we then get to discern whether they're wise or not? And there was no one supporting those policemen to say, do you really want to own that perception and that disregard of humanity, the humanity of my mother and father? And when my father was tortured, I would say the same to those jailers. Do you really want to own that? Because we're not torturing ourselves by burning our skin, but we are torturing ourselves by owning the perceptions that bring suffering to ourselves. And in a way, we're burning ourselves. Not because we're bad people. And essentially those policemen and the jailers weren't either, because they didn't have mindfulness to intercede, to say, do I want to take this as me and mine? Maybe this is just a conditioned thought that I can let go of. Because in the same way we let go of harming the earth by being careful of what kind of cars we drive, perhaps we can take the same care with our perceptions and look at which perceptions harm us and other people and which don't. And the thoughts that arise from those perceptions. Going back to, well, how can I tell? Oh wow, I'm like way late. So, are you up for another few minutes? So, how do we tell? I mean, one way is this bringing suffering? Is this bringing suffering to myself, or is it bringing well-being and happiness? That question. And if it's bringing suffering, why am I owning it? Why am I torturing myself? No blame or shame, but just really naming it as it is. Not because we're bad people, but because we haven't been given the support early on in our lives to do this inquiry, yay, we have the support now. Is it bringing suffering? And another way to ask myself, which we've been supporting you, is there caring and friendship in my mind at the moment, in this perception and in this thought? Because if there isn't, then there's no reason to continue to think it and perceive it. Because if those policemen had perceived my mother with caring, they would have said, "Of course, Mrs. Berman, and is there anyone to take care of your children because we are arresting you?" But there wasn't, because there was no mindfulness and capacity to say, oh, this perception and these actions are bringing suffering. There was nothing to intervene. Now, I want to say, there have been many times after a Dharma talk when I have walked out of the room and felt, oh my God, that was terrible. And I've noticed all these negative energies come up. And I know not to own them, but they're up. And so the bowing down to this being, and this being's expression is to know that that might happen, that it arises, and I can be patient and caring for the time that it lives, because it's up there. And I don't have to own it as true. So I'm not saying it immediately goes away. Oh, you're not me and mine, so then I expect you to disappear. They have a life of their own, and sometimes that life is deeply conditioned and cycles and cycles. And because I understand that truly I'm a person that doesn't deserve those thoughts, I try my hardest not to feed them, and also respect that they're living inside of me and they have their life. And can I be gracious with it because they're not mine? Because they are not mine, can I be gracious and respectful of them without believing them? Okay, well, I have to end there, even though it's only half my Dharma talk. Because we have singing coming on soon, and of course I want to really honor that. So, may our perceptions, our bodies, our minds, our sensations, our feelings and emotions, our thoughts be liberated to join nature in a field of respect and love. May we live with the mantra, this is not me or mine. May ownership be liberated. Thank you.